I haven't quite yet decided whether I should be David Frost or Michael Parkinson or Terry Wogan, which is the best sort of approach to take. But anyway, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I'm really delighted that Andrew has given up some time on this incredibly busy day, which started about 3:30 this morning, with a journey down from Hull, and the enormous energy required to create those three, but the two major performances this morning that I'm sure will spectacular performances. But Andrew, as you know, recorded the first symphonic cycle, recorded cycle of symphonies, and that's really what we're going to talk about. So I've got some questions here, which I prepared earlier. And I'm going to do the hardest one first, which is your favourite?
I think you probably heard it today. I think it's the seventh row. The ninth occupies a position of some affection, because I think I've probably done it more than anybody else on the planet. The recording, performance in Hull, 3 with the Liverpool Philharmonic, and that's an extraordinary piece, and that was an extraordinary journey because we hopped in the cycle. We were going to go through chronologically, but we decided to record the ninth after doing 1 and 2. And that was quite an extraordinary jump to make. Stylistic.
Yes. Well, let's get on talking about that one a bit later. But just getting back to the sort of preparing for the cycle. Did because it was the first cycle to be recorded, did you find yourself researching or preparing in any particular way, or did you just buy the scores and?
No, that would have been nice to do that, but there's a lot of extant material that you can source. Arnold's own performances, but you have to take those not as gospel. Some of the conditions that he recorded them under were quite stressful. Edward Downes, if you can get hold of a copy of the tape Edward Downes made of the 7th Symphony, beg, borrow or steal it, it's a fantastic performance. Fantastic performance. And I think that was done in that festival in Manchester when they did, was it the 60th? They did Haydn and Arnold. And I think it's from that time. Regarding the 9th, there was a tape of Charles Groves conducting that. It was recorded with the BBC Philharmonic in Manchester, but it wasn't really broadcastable. There was a trumpeter had rather a bad day. But that was very good source material, both in checking notes that I'd spotted that were wrong in those performances and deciding which way to take my own. And there were commercial recordings available. Hickox was well ahead of the Naxos one. He had got to 4 and 5. 5 and 6 at the time we jumped to do the 9. And I don't think Chandos were very pleased with us.
Wasn't Todd Hamleys the first recorded cycle?
No, his 9th came after mine, so it couldn't have been the first completed. I created the 9th.
That's right. Yes, Naxos beat everybody else to number 9, didn't they?
They did. Purely on artistic ground.
Can you give us a sort of a chronology of the actual event? You know, how you got to Ireland and how the actual event unfolded, the recording event.
Well, David Denton was the guy working for Naxos who just put artists to the repertoire, and he said that this. I've been doing quite a lot. I started about 1990, 1992, with a lot of Sullivan's theatre music. And I think they had me down as a sort of our British music correspondent. So they put me onto the Arnold cycle. I was thrilled to do it because, although I'd only really knew 5 and 2 at that stage, so I did learn with the cycle. But they were nicely spaced, so there was time to prepare for them. And they were all done with the same orchestra in Ireland. First few were produced by Chris Craker, another clarinet, part of the clarinet mafia, and so they were all recorded in the same space, the same orchestra. I think that gives it a certain continuity. There was a point at which, when we hadn't done 7 and 8, and it was the one left to do, and H&H, the company, wanted to have me go to Eastern Europe to finish the cycle, and I said I wouldn't do it. So we hung on. But we didn't get Chris Craig because he'd parted company with them by then, but Tim Hanley became the producer, and he really recreated the sound that Chris and I had got in that hall. So I think there is a continuity in the sound. I'm quite proud of it. But Paul's question, yes, you listen to the source material. It's a lot of study and a lot of reading. At that time, I think there weren't so many books about Arnold then. Mr. Burton Page's book was a good source for where you are in the life, which is crucial to how you look at the symphonies, where he is, say, 1 and 2, compared to 7 and 8. We're in a very, very different place.
Well, obviously Malcolm was with you. Tell us about that.
Yes, he was. He attended every session of every symphony. Every session of every symphony. There was just one when he had to leave early because he was taken ill. And he went to the hotel with Anthony. And I went to see him in the hotel. I've actually got a photograph, which Anthony took. And there's me in a chair, and there's Sir Malcolm lying on the bed in his dressing gown. And I couldn't take my eye off his foot. I wanted to see if I could see a wound. I didn't know which foot I couldn't remember which foot it was. And they were sort of like that. And so I was going to talk to them. Very improper.
What was his contribution?
At the end of every session, tea interval, lunch, coffee, I'd go and sit with him. And people say to me, did he come and say that was too fast, or would you do that slower? It wasn't like that at all. It reminded me of a story I heard about Brahms, which was a chamber musician going up to him and asking what he thought of performance. He said it's fine, but it was radically different from another one. And it just shows that composers don't necessarily have such a dictatorial view of their music. I think probably Stravinsky did, but and I think Arnold quite liked hearing it done certain ways. He certainly never intervened or grabbed me by the throat to say something that hadn't worked, but I checked in with him every time. Especially tempo relationships. There's some in the first symphony. I had a solution. I had a way of doing it, and I thought it was quite good. And I just wanted to check. He said it's fine. So he wasn't intervention.
But you talk about the sound that you created with Chris Craig. Can you talk a little bit about that? What is the sound? How did you create it?
Well, I think all conductors have a sound. You can see that if you have 2 or 3 different conductors in a concert, that by doing something with their body or how you encourage a sound. So I've always believed, well, I've done some teaching and conducting, and I've always believed that people have a sound in the way they present themselves to us. And it depends on, but this is a lovely place to play. We really enjoyed playing. We could hear really clearly. If you imagine in the 7th, all those piling of semiquavers, the rifle, the gunfire, it's crucial that we can hear. And so I think where you are, and the concert hall in Dublin, it's a great place to play. And Chris knew how to do it. But conductors do remember things. When I was doing some of the Sullivan ballet music for Vespers, we did one of the movements with a particular pair of cymbals. It was a magnificent pair of cymbals, and I thought it was fantastic. We then came back about 6 months later to do another ballet, which happened to contain the same music. Now, you might think, oh, they just would have dropped one in from the previous room. Not at all. You do it again. But the cymbals weren't right, and I said to the principal percussionist, can't we have those same cymbals that we had last time? And he just looked around at the cupboard behind and went, I think I got a few brownie points there. But, I mean, you do retain sounds and you do retain attack time.
So I still want to push you a bit further on this because it's so interesting. Is it to do with balance? Is it to do with the way that you use dynamics? Is it to do with the kind of sonorities that you want?
Well, that's in the music. A lot of youth orchestras that play Arnold sound very, very good. In his music is a fantastic sound. Now that isn't always easy to get. And some composers are very elusive. I think Mahler has a sound. It's as if it were there from the word go. And I would suggest, you listen to Mahler's First Symphony and then go through the second. He was very early in stating his sound, wasn't he? You can hear it in number one. You don't have to wait till number 4 to hear what Mahler sounds like. And I think Arnold has that. And I think it's in the way he scores and in the way he uses extremities of instruments. Nearly every score you will look at by Malcolm Arnold has 2 flutes and a piccolo, 2 oboes, never corongo, 2 clarinets, never bass clarinet. I'm talking about the orchestra. 2 bassoons, sometimes a contra. So he's got piccolo and contra at the bottom ends. Very prominent tuba parts. Very difficult trumpet parts. High, close together harmonic. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult indeed. Very tiring. Trombones and tuba used in a certain way. Harp occasion, celeste occasion, but nearly always timpani and 2 percussion. It's remarkable how many Arnold's orchestral scores you can open, and that would be your scoring from the Little Suite to the 8th Symphony. And I think it is in the way he scores. And if you can, clearly if you're doing an awful lot of it, you get the code, you get the balancing. I mean, numbers of string players are quite crucial, but not necessarily vital. Because it's so windy, brassy percussion. He wrote superbly. Most brass players, wind players, love playing on.
Interesting you said that, because John Amos, who was speaking briefly yesterday morning, made the same point, and evidently Malcolm once talked about the fact that he never used the corongo, and it's because it's one of those middle range instruments, and he didn't like the middle range. He liked the extremes,
yes.
So he wasn't really interested in the corongo, not for its sonority, but because of the notes it would play.
Yeah.
Are there any, were there any difficult sections, parts of any of the symphonies that were difficult to get down?
6th Symphony, last movement, is excruciatingly difficult passage with the strings in. And this was the professional orchestra who was sailing through most things we put in front of them. We were rehearsing like a youth orchestra might, slow, separate bows. One more time, then we put the red light on and do it. Very, very, that's quite rare. But people tell me about other difficulties. There are symphonies, the string symphony, the brass symphony is very difficult. But in the symphonies, the orchestral symphonies, I can only think of that bit that we really did send everybody else away and do a bit of homework.
I mean, that orchestral difficulties, were there any technical difficulties in getting the work done? Like, for example, I know those great
Cowbell.
3 cowbells.
Cowbells was great fun. We had different, all the percussion was very kindly been sourced by a gentleman who's got everything together. When we did the cowbell for the 7th Symphony recording, it was a big wooden frame, and it was things this size. Some debate about this, because I've read in some books that people think it should be the small orchestral cowbell to show the sheer futility of the sound against that monstrous sound. But I can't believe that. So I'm in the camp of biggest sound, loudest sound. It has to be a response. If it sounds like it's dinner time, you've failed. It has to be something substantial. And it's interesting, at the end of the first one, he just requires 1 bell to be in. But the others are both two bells. And it's best if you use 1 player, because if you get 2 players, it might be just ba-dum. So, it has to be 1, so even if it's not quite with you, at least it'll be together itself. Well, this guy is back to me, the percussion. We did the 2 bells before, and he just wedded these things. I just thought the whole frame was going to go. And we did several of them. It was great fun. He thought it was hilarious. So I can't remember how many we did, but that was a particular technical thing. There's one very interesting thing in the 8th Symphony, which we did by a bit of trickery. If you record a CD, the microphone is so sensitive that, you know, a pencil on a stand or a page turn, sometimes you have to stop, turn the page, record it so that you can splice it and not get an audible sound. And in the 8th Symphony, the last 3 things the side drummer does is with snare, without snare. Have you ever tried to turn a snare drum off? So we did a complete one with all 3 hits of the snare on, we did another one with no snare on, and then this one. So you don't hear the... And you wouldn't have heard it live today. He did it by taking the snare off, but these CD recordings are so sensitive.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. You talk about trickery there. I mean, sometimes I know when recordings are made, there's a lot of kind of stuff mixing going on and changing actual dynamics and with all the hundreds of microphones. And some recordings, live recordings, for example, are done with much less technical wizardry. Did you have a lot of that going on?
Chris, we did lots and lots of long live takes. Yeah, it was. It just seemed to work better to do performances. So we do longer sessions as possible. But it's nice to have performed the 7th because I haven't performed it before today. And I think it's a symphony that needs live performance. It's a dramatic. We could hear you concentrating. We were aware of your performance. It's a shared thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Orchestra, you contribute more than you may think.
It is palpable, isn't it? You can really. I mean, I think the audience reaction to all the symphonies this weekend has been as good as the performances. I mean, they have been performances of themselves, but it's spontaneous. Malcolm's music just creates this enormous, spontaneous, deeply felt enthusiasm. It's not kind of put in; it's a deeply felt enthusiasm, and this, of course, is what Malcolm does. I mean, it's such a shame he's not here with us. Because he would love that.
Well, it was to me because the last time I conducted here, it was the birthday concert. It would be his. I'm talking about this earlier. Was it 1996? It was broadcast on Radio 3 from here. John Field Fantasy, Scottish Dances, and the 9th Symphony, and he was sitting in one of the boxes. So I just looked across at that box today.
So, having had this real understanding of the works through playing them, can you feel yourself a sort of development through the 9 symphonies? Do you feel a sort of development of symphonic thought, a development of use of the orchestra? Do you feel development is something that comes through to you?
Well, I do, but what the symphonies chronicle is the deterioration of a first-class mind. There's some extraordinary things that you're beginning to see a hint of in the 8th that you will hear in the 9th tonight. This business with the 2-part writing and so on. So you get to understand that. I did the Welsh dances and Irish dances, which are at the same time as that. So that world that you get into is extraordinary. You do feel you've been witness to some sort of chronicle of a decline. Even when he does a throwback, like the last movement of the 8th Symphony, you think, oh right, we're right back here. But there's something sinister and not quite right about it, in the way that theme develops, because it isn't as buoyant and happy-go-lucky, is it?
So my final question before we kind of open it to the floor is, how do you rate Malcolm's cycle in the pantheon of British symphonic cycles, European symphonic cycles of the 20th century?
Well, I think it's quite important, but I think sometimes you also have to be quite brave and admit when there are things that aren't wholly wonderful throughout the whole thing. So I would warn against becoming too evangelical if there are plenty of other wonderful things around. Arnold, for example. And it is an extraordinary cycle of its kind. I don't really know of any other chronicle like that. You perhaps could see it in a poetry, or you could see it in a series of paintings, but to have an oral experience of judging where you are in this man's extraordinary life. But it's come my way a lot, and I'm delighted to pass it on. I find when I'm working with youngsters, they're absolutely fascinated, because they might read about composers 200 years ago who had difficult lives or had contact with sort of bad influences, but to find something of their own time, that immediately fires them, and that composers aren't people with notebooks wandering by streams and writing down tunes. There's some somewhat cathartic system going on here, and I think youngsters identify with that very well. I've always enjoyed doing these symphonies with amateurs and with youngsters. Professionals don't find them that difficult. They're not ferociously difficult, but it's what the point you made earlier about balance and ensemble. think I've got something to say about him. Yeah.
Any questions from the floor?
Can I ask one, please? Do you think, Andrew, that we would have had a Ninth Symphony if it hadn't been for Anthony Day?
Well, from what I read, I don't think we'd have had a Ninth Symphony but for Alan Poulton and Anthony Day.
Right, well, I don't mind two together. I think there would be some reference made to Anthony Day who looked after that.
For me, he was always there, and I never saw Malcolm without John Anthony Day, and he was a crucial part of Malcolm's attendance at the sessions, which I think give it a if it hadn't been for Anthony getting them across there and getting to every session, my cycle would be the week before.
But there was a point, wasn't there, when we thought that probably Malcolm wouldn't be composing anymore, and the Ninth Symphony was a bonus year.
Yes.
And it was really as opposed to being born again,
I think that's
as opposed
absolutely
to progression.
right. Absolutely right. The extraordinary thing was that when it was produced, that there was still a lot of opposition to it. And it was my tutor, Charles Groves, who I think fought quite hard for that piece. I think Ted had more or less rejected it. It was part of the 1985 European Music Year, and they were rather disappointed, I think. But it was Charles Groves. Hey, by the way, did you know it's virtually 30 years to the day since Charles premiered the 8th Symphony? It was late October in Manchester, 1981. Hello.
You spoke of the sound, the signature, as it were, and how youth orchestras enjoy playing. Has Britain that? Because I know young people love his music. Do you think he has that same sort of signature?
Yes, I do. And he also has an amazing track record of writing for young groups and amateur groups, so he knew the limitations and the possibilities, should be more positive, not limitations, the possibilities. Can I give you two thoughts I've come prepared with? One is that it's always struck me that in 1966, when that coal tip collapsed on Aberfan, that it was Malcolm Arnold's birthday. It was the 21st of October 1966. And I would... I thought of this when I was doing the Welsh dances, and I wondered if there was a case of saying, why didn't he write the Welsh dances earlier? But if you look through the history, and by the way, Harris and Meredith are very good in that regard. It doesn't appear to be mentioned in any way. But I can't help thinking, it happened at about 9 o'clock in the morning, didn't it? And that would have made an effect. And I've always wondered whether there was something significant in that, and the colour of the Welsh dances, that sort of melancholy. And I have another. Can I?
Yeah, please.
It's about D and A flat. Do you know? That's still Lifeboat March. Key of A flat, purely because this is D. It's the tritone.
Yeah.
It's mathematically about halfway between the two. It's the road note, really. What did we hear today? A flat. The juxtaposition of A flat and D, and I just wondered if there's an echo there that you might have thought of from before, going back to those home keys. Completely the other way around. In one, the tune is in A flat and the dissonance is in D. The other is resolutely in D and the dissonance is there.
Definitely.
Arnold trivia for you.
Andrew, would you have varied your interpretation of any of the symphonies through the knowledge in playing them several times? In other words, are you happy that your interpretations of the symphonies as recorded are necessarily the ones you feel now?
I'm pretty sure the seventh was pretty much the same timing as for this. Yeah. I could do it now. Pop up, pop up, pop up. There's very little problem with that. The slow movement to hand, because a trombonist might need to go forward here, backwards there. Practicalities of accommodating artists within the orchestra. That's just music making, isn't it? That's music. You don't perform identically. You can experiment, but I don't think they're radically different. Well, the recording that he did with the BBC Symphony Orchestra of Medivale, the 7th Symphony, starts off at the minute that he marks in the score. And I think the band start playing him up, because he goes slow. And then he ends up doing in 4 at the metronome mark. He's put it through. So in other words, towards the end, it's half speed. And my 16-minute movement is 21 minutes on his. But there are other forces at play here. It's a wonderful performance, but it ends up, I think the players were beginning to slightly take the rise out of them, because there would have been an internal clock that they would have tried to pull things back, but if he was physically beating it slow, the timing of when he was asked to do that recording is not at a good time for him. And we don't know what problems he had that day, but he was a fine conductor, of course. Not only of his own music, but he was asked to regularly conduct at the proms other people's music. But I don't think he had all his powers in that time of recording. That's not to say all Arnold recording. I think there's some very fine ones from the 50s and 60s, isn't there? But the one of the repertoire we're talking about now is not necessarily his best, I think.
When I reviewed a performance of the 7th Symphony in Heidelberg for the Society, I'd said that the cowbell wasn't adequate. It was a handheld one.
Yes.
And when the person did it the first time, it moved.
I remember.
And
it was a good piece.
Yeah, and last time you spoke to him, you were a bit miffed that I compared that cowbell to Todd Hanley's on his recording. His cycle wasn't available then, and I just wanted to mention it to try and promote it. But I think I should put on record that, and I think you've definitely the biggest and the best cowbell.
But on the other hand, I'm not decrying the viewpoint which you may have in Todd Hanley may have, which is to have a smaller, trite sounding bell, is to express the futility of what he's trying to do, because he just does say cowbell. He doesn't like get the biggest cowbell in or like the Anvil in Marlow.
No, I'm in your camp. I mean,
Okay.
the way the percussionist whacked it today was
But one more. Oh, 2 more. Then we'll start.
A tricky question, but you're particularly well placed to try and answer this. You've got your own recordings of the symphonies, like the cycle, which is great. And there are many other recordings of the symphony. And a lot of us feel that there's unjust neglect of Arnold's works. In reality, there are a lot of recordings and we're very grateful for those. I just wondered, how do we reconcile having so many quality recordings with so few
Live
professional
performances,
ones?
yeah.
And also, another point, again, you displayed today, how Arnold's music, including the symphonies, is performed so much by youth orchestras and amateur orchestras very successfully. It's even programming what even more serious works, and yet in the professional world, far less so.
I haven't got an answer for you, but I would. We were saying earlier that if the 7th were to be scheduled, I think he'd have a lot more followers. If anybody lives in the north of England, last Saturday in November, Hull Philharmonic and this orchestra doing the same 2 symphonies again. We've got Emma Johnson coming to play Copeland Clarinet Concerto. So if you want to get across the Hull late November, I've got some leaflets as well.
Last question.
Could I perhaps help resolve the question of the cowbells? Mr. Penny is absolutely right, of course. There are different opinions. I was a little involved in the Vernon Handley cycle, which was the first to be completed, actually. But I remember Todd discussing this with Todd, and he said exactly what you said, that you take 2 views. Either you want something that's going to make a terrific impact, or you choose a smaller one to emphasise futility, triteness. Now, I think in performance, as you showed today, you need the big one. With recording, where you can help the balance, the other aspect can come through. Like all music, it all depends, and there are as many views as there are performers. Can I just say that I think we owe Mr. Penny an enormous debt of gratitude for what he's done, and this has been the most thrilling weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a very quick question.
Okay, how do you think Arnold's music will be viewed in, say, 15 years' time? I mean, do you think it will be more highly thought of than it is today, or it will just stay at this level? I mean, will his time come?
Well, I'm regularly saying that I think his time has come. And I'll tell you what, I think it was to do with Classic FM and drive time programs, taking these 3 and 4 minute movements. And when my disc of the dances came out, it was on the radio an awful lot because they could take the movement or 2 minutes or 4 movements, and it fitted well into those schedules. Then they released the Arnold conducting the dances himself, and rightly so. I think they were chosen ahead, and we hear those more often. And I said that when I did this talk 2 or 3 years ago, that when Classic FM discovered Goretzky and played Symphony of Sorrows, that they played the Ninth Symphony in much the same way, and the world was ready for that. And 20 years earlier they weren't. So I think this time has. So don't look to 20 years' time, 50 years' time. These are the good old days. These are the good old days.
So, I must thank Andrew hugely for giving up his time. He should be on his way back to bed really now.